power is the drive of everything living to realize itself with increasing intensity and extensity. So it is the drive of everything living to realize itself. When I heard that, I was really touched because I am a deep believer of our personal journey being a journey of self-realization, of becoming ever more of who we are. So if I understand power as that drive of everything living to realize itself, then actually our personal journey is the journey of stepping ever more into our power. So being fully realized means also expressing our power potential.
Do you want to go back to normal after Corona? Do you really want to go back to normal? I don't. Welcome to Not Back to Normal. I am Markus Drön, and I want COVID-19 to change the business world for the better. In each episode, I talk to entrepreneurs, business leaders, and change makers about how they have adapted in this crisis and how they further intend to change the way they live, work, and run their businesses for the better to make capitalism much more conscious and working for all. In this episode, I'm speaking with Christiane Schöller. Christiane is a pioneer in self-organization in companies. Just two impressive examples from her resume. She has been at the core of bringing Holacracy, a radically new way of self-organization to companies mainly in Europe, and she is a founding member and partner of Encode.org, which is a role model for and midwife to the purest form of self-organization, the for-purpose enterprise. We will dive into what this means and other aspects of the so-called New Work movement in this episode. Where this episode goes deeper than perhaps others, though, is at the level of self. I felt inspired by Christiane's level of consciousness. And what I mean by that is, as an example, she casually mentions that after founding her first company, an ad agency, she took over the business of her father. Well, that business happens to be one of Austria's oldest and biggest private banks. So please enjoy this very dense and timeless conversation that we recorded back in August 2020, in which we cover everything from how our fears are holding us back to the governing laws of the universe and many topics in between. Right, let's jump right into how Christiane defines the three terms behind the title of her upcoming book: love, power, and wisdom. Christiane, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Markus. Awesome. Love being here.
I think this conversation really is about the systemic levels of the self, obviously, because we can only change ourselves and do this in the here and now. And then since the application of that in your world and also in my world is really work and the nature of work, things like conscious capitalism are really dear to me. I'd like to also have a broader look at what happens in organizations, and I'd like to delve into this whole notion of self-organization later on. But I'd love to start with the intent of your new book, Love, Power, and Purpose. I'd like to establish some common definition here. So what is love and what is power for you?
I think about 10 or 11 years ago, Adam Kahane wrote a book he's called Power and Love. I learned about that book because I started looking and researching for my book that I already knew was sort of, the working title was Love, Power, and Purpose. It's quite fixed now in the meantime. I found some really interesting stuff through reading Adam Kahane's book. Adam Kahane researched back a lot about Martin Luther King and the professor where he made his doctorate, who was an American-German philosopher called Paul Tillich. And through Adam Kahane and his research, I found the two definitions that are really, really, really helpful and have been for quite a while now for me on this journey. So I would like to start with how Paul Tillich defines power. I haven't found a better definition for that. power is the drive of everything living to realize itself with increasing intensity and extensity. So it is the drive of everything living to realize itself. When I heard that, I was really touched because I am a deep believer of our personal journey being a journey of self-realization, of becoming ever more of who we are. So if I understand power as that drive of everything living to realize itself, then actually our personal journey is the journey of stepping ever more into our power. So being fully realized means also expressing our power potential, right? And then there's the question of love. And love, Paul Tillich defines as the drive to unify the separated, not to create unity, but to reveal the unity that is there. I then have to go back to something that Martin Luther King said, because that's what puts the two things so well in relation. And he says, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. So if you have then the unification of love and power, the drive to self-realize, which is our life of exploring fully of who we are, and still never losing the sense of the connectedness of everything, which means that when I step into my full power while realizing that I am always connected with everything, I lose the desire to be powerful over others.
That's a very neat definition of probably everything that we can observe every day. You could zoom into the level of self. You could look at how organizations are designed, run, measured, managed. I mean, the first association to this is the yin and yang that comes up. So there's definitely some Eastern philosophy, some Eastern traditions in there. And I guess at a more sort of like profound level of experience, if you just take the real world, the physical world, or what we think the physical world is, we also have those two competing forces. We have an expanding universe. We have a lot of creation through destruction. We have the force field between gravity and things that fluctuate. In German, it's Fliehkraft. I don't know quite what the English term for that is. Things that just move away. And then at the level of DNA, which is what we are all made of, DNA and RNA and what every other living thing is made of, it wants to propel itself. I've never seen power through that perspective or through that lens, but this actually explains a lot to me what I know about DNA and the will to live. I mean, that's a saying that we use quite often, right? And there is actually will to live. If you look at any animal, any living thing, it has an incredible will to live. Even if you try to destroy it, it's just trying to repair itself, or, and then obviously through replication and passing on the genes to other generations. I mean, that's what Richard Dawkins wrote about in The Selfish Gene. It is quite selfish because it wants to survive. Then all the genes of all the species are interconnected with each other, which just gets us into the whole non-dualism of you can't really exist without the other. And that gets us to, I guess, making a very, very far leap into neoliberalism, which is basically the doctrine that our capitalistic system, or the vast majority of our capitalistic system, is based upon. And you have exactly that. You have the separation of power and love, because these entities, these inks, these incorporated entities, they are enforced to just do what you described, to just realize itself and become more and more and more of it. But there is no love, there is no care, there is no unity with anything else. I mean, just literally hearing myself playing this back to you, this is an extremely powerful and quite unique way of looking at things. And it hits right into the bullseye of where I think one of our problems is with the way we work, with the way we organize our companies. So tell me more.
Yeah. If we look at the organizational world and some of the old stories that for many people have a hard time letting go because it's just ingrained not just in our stories around organizing, it's ingrained in so many different aspects of our life. The competitiveness, we start in our schools through giving grades, and if somebody has a bad grade, it's bad and you feel less worth, and if you have a good grade, you feel better. So that's when we start to be competitive. I want to be better. And then we're trained to go up a career ladder, which automatically tells us we have to be better than others because the further up we go, the less space there is. So we're trained from very early childhood on to love and power are just two completely different things. Love has its place in one part of the world, maybe with our family, ideally, and then with a partner, and then with kids. And then power is like in a completely different part. But I think nature actually is different. And we are part of nature. So everything that separates us from nature is a construct. It's a story, like everything. I mean, we're telling ourselves stories right now, but I'm inspired to explore stories that hold the potential for healing.
And if we zoom into the future, into the near future, and anything that happens from now, how does that story look like when love and power, when they are united and when they're also in service of purpose? So if we just basically move to where you want the world to be, how would you describe that?
I use a definition where purpose is the highest creative potential. So it's what is the highest output that I, as an individual, am here to create. This is my personal purpose. And of course, through my life, I explore that purpose deeper through my experiences. And it's the same for an organization. If the organizational purpose is the deepest creative potential of an organization that an organization can bring to the world. So for me, purpose is something that automatically defines that I am in service of the greater whole. I deeply believe that we're all here for a reason. And the reason, our soul, the potential of our soul has its place. So Rupert Spira defines that as everything is consciousness. Our soul is located. It is a location within this consciousness. And that location is my potential, my soul potential. And that is my purpose. So that's the reason why I am here. That's what I understand by personal purpose, right? So it's the soul, it's the potential of my soul. When I hold the unification of love and power, I will have access to very powerful, loving expression. If I understand power as I do, if I don't separate it from love, I will not harm the connectedness, understanding that harming others harms myself. It's just, you cannot when you believe that connectedness, which is love. And the same goes for organizations. If it is like the reason why an organization forms around a need and fulfilling that need in the world is the purpose, I will be in service of the greater whole. If I do that through unified love and power, just imagine how powerful and how in service that is.
Maybe that's a good time to dive into the topic of self-organization. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a background story. How did you get to the insight or the awareness or the epiphany, even if you like, that self-organization is better than the command and control, hierarchical silo structures that we've been having for 150 years or even longer, but since the real advent of the sort of like the big corporations. What's your history with this topic? How did you get into it? And also, what did you create in the process of that?
I'm an entrepreneur. I started my first business in 1989, and then I took over our family company. And I did that many years, didn't question that at all. My first company was an advertising agency. So it was about, telling a story that would make everything look bright and shiny, whether it was actually bright and shiny or not. And then sort of learning the hierarchy and how power is played out, taking over from my father. So another power to power issue here. And after about 10 years in advertising, there was some sense of emptiness. And I felt like, wow, something is really missing. And then I found out, okay, I was much more interested in the dynamics of the people inside of the organization and how those communication, how that happened. And then I started to say holistic communications, but I very soon realized that I didn't know anything about it. So I started, the whole education part, actually starting with NLP, shifting into systemic education, systemic organizations development, systemic coaching, systemic constellations. And as a colleague, once you start down that route, you never stop learning, which is beautiful. Then I had my son, and when I went back to work, I stepped out of my company, handed it over to my husband. I left the family company and I started training, started communication, very soon went into leadership development, and eventually started developing my own leadership development programs and worked also in organizations, systemic organizations development. I did that for quite some years, I'd say about, 6, 7, 8 years. And I suddenly started to realize that, I was so driven by a sense of wanting to help people create a context where they could feel work could be joyful, where they could grow, where they could express themselves. But I just realized after some years that it was useless. So working with a few people in a group, in a leadership group, and then they go back into the organization and the system just sucks them back in. And I found that super frustrating. And then I started searching again. So there has to be something else. I ran into Holacracy. I learned about sociocracy and Holacracy mostly. At the time, to me, Holacracy appeared as the more effective and efficient way. So I'm easily enthusiastic about things. And I thought, yeah, this is just it. This is exactly what I was looking for. It was a really big shift to learn it, to learn about it, to learn to understand it. Actually, within a very short time, my friend and business partner and I, who'd worked together, that working and actually the friendship as well, actually broke up. And that was an eye-opener. So I was really enthusiastic about Holacracy and she wasn't. And it broke up the working relationship. And so I'm like, this cannot be the better alternative. And what I did different than many others, I didn't blame Holacracy for it because I still believed in the system and in the tool as such for this, what I was just slightly beginning to understand what self-organization could be, and looked for what was missing. So I've realized, okay, so this Holacracy governs the organization and not the people. So where does the people stuff go? And I started developing a methodology called language of spaces, which would help to build the capacity to understand that the organizational perspective and the people perspective are different perspectives, and that when we deal with our issues called tensions, it is super useful to be able to differentiate what is personal and what is organizational. What is organizational goes into the organizational processes, and what is personal needs its own space and process. It's different. Social dynamics are different. Interpersonal dynamics are different than organizational dynamics. And that was the birth of language of spaces, which today is a framework for personal development, for accompanying the personal development that is always triggered for people who are concerned by the shift from a conventional power hierarchy into self-organization. That was my path of exploring, and interestingly enough, that exploration of the differentiation of the personal and the organizational, I think also helped me realize the love and power issue, because differentiation doesn't mean separation. Language is really important. This is also where I started to understand what was driving me and getting me up every morning. And then I started to get more interested in, learning better what self-organization actually really is. In the meantime, the big movement, so this is like 10 years ago, I was a real pioneer in that field in Europe. In the meantime, then Frederic Laloux's book came, and then, many of the movements, like you said, conscious capitalism, conscious business, the whole teal, the holacracy, the sociocracy, and many others. So lots of that is emerging. And many terms are being used, like self-management and self-organization and evolutionary. And so I started to get very curious of wanting to, at least when I speak about something, I always want to be clear on my definitions, not saying that my definition is right, but just say this is the definition that is in my head and in my heart and in my soul when I do my work and when I talk about these things. So I started exploring self-organization and what it actually is. So for me, there's a difference between self-organization and self-management.
I'm interested also in why self-organization. Why is that more promising or already more successful than the old school way of organizing and managing?
That's a really, really important question. And I can best describe that with the title of some articles that I wrote. And the title is Tuning In to the Evolutionary Dance of the Universe. And now that comes from how I understand self-organization. So I understand self-organization as the organizing principle of the universe. It is the oldest principle that exists, starting from the Big Bang. The universe expands and evolves, self-organized. And if we look at it in an organic structure, right? Every organic structure has the same organizing principles as the universe. And if we self-organize in an enterprise, we intend to mirror those self-organizing principles. That is the interplay. This is how every part knows what its function is and how to interact with the other parts and how it adapts to the ever-changing environment. And that's what self-organization is. Therefore, self-organization is mirroring the evolutionary dance of the universe. If we take an organic structure, and this is where the term holarchy comes from. So holacracy is not the inventor of the term holarchy, it's the other way around. So knowing what a holarchy is, an organic structure, is what gave holacracy its name. So trying to mirror how the adaptability to what is needed through an evolutionary process is what self-organization in an enterprise tries to mirror. The many arguments around whether that is actually possible, or one of the main arguments that it's a difference whether you have a plant organizing its own growth and evolution or a group of people. The difference is that the parts of a plant don't have psyches and, like we humans have. That, of course, is true. This is where the differentiation of organization and people comes in, that you can actually organize. And if you look at organization and you say this is the structure, and you have processes that evolve the structure in a way it can adapt to an ever-changing need, aka environment. And then you have the people, which form the social system. The people are not the structure. The people actually take on the parts of the structure. But the dynamics between the people are different than the dynamics in an organic structure. And that's where I really deeply learned that through the language of spaces, through the differentiation of the organizational and the personal, which ultimately also led to some organizational answers or enterprise answers, but I'm stopping now. So self-organization is the evolutionary principle. And then, of course, how a self-organized system then is a system that expresses itself through self-maintenance or self-renewal and self-transcendence within its own meaning-making process. But that's systems theory, really.
And what are the successful examples of this self-organizing principle mirroring the cosmic dance? What companies come to mind that you have seen or worked with or worked in that have nailed that?
Probably the ones that have actually surrendered and learned to truly practice holacracy. Plus adding other stuff which is needed. Holacracy is only part of the game. Today, I think the most advanced self-organizing system that you can find, or actually the only one that really goes all the way into the organizational, the people structure, the financial, and the legal structure, is the for-purpose enterprise that encode.org has defined. That is what is self-organization all the way, or the furthest it is imaginable today. There is nothing which has taken self-organization further than the for-purpose enterprise.
And you are a co-founder of encode.org. Could you explain to us what a for-purpose enterprise is?
The for-purpose enterprise is a legally anchored enterprise that is self-organized in all its aspects in service of purpose. You have the self-organized structure, the organization. You have the matching sort of connected, self-organized people context. And you have the third, it's defined in three containers that overlap in the middle. And you have the self-organized legal and financial system. What that really means is you have fully shifted power. You have no power held anywhere personally over another person. It is fully distributed. It's like in nature, the stem doesn't have power over the leaf, and the leaf doesn't have power over the stem, and so on. And in the people and in the financial system, the for-purpose enterprise is fully shifted into self-organization. And no employees anymore, because employment creates dependency. So everybody in the organization is a investor, because investment isn't just money. It's also your time, your talent, and your energy. So you show up, you invest your time, your talent, your energy, and maybe your money. Everybody's an investor. No privileged classes, no owners that can trump. Everything is baked into the self-organized processes. That's the for-purpose enterprise.
I find it fascinating how your work in organizations and with organizations now links up to your personal purpose in your book. So I'd like to come back to this. So we want a world in which love and power is united in service of purpose. We want, for various reasons that we can dive into, organizations, let's just say, that are more fluid, that are less rigid structures, more fluid structures. And let's just go all the way back to the pain point when love and power are separated from each other. And I'd now like to take an imaginary chief executive on a little journey together with you and me in the here and now on this podcast. We can even call him Michael. Michael is a German executive. He's quite tall. He's done a degree in engineering. He's then done a PhD in something else. He's climbed up the corporate ladder, and he is a board member now of a mid-sized company in Germany. When I met Michael about 20 years ago in my first job, I made an observation about kind of like the people and the politics and the emotions in the room. And he basically said, afterwards, he took me aside and he said, Marcus, just to be clear, this thing with the emotions, that doesn't belong here. You just got to keep that out. Okay. If you got to keep that out, then we're fine. You know, you'll do well, and you can keep coming to my meetings, you know, I was an executive assistant at the time, like a board assistant, and, you know, but just leave that stuff out. Doesn't belong in business. And that was one of the most, in hindsight, valuable days of my life. At the time, it felt quite traumatizing, because I felt like, where am I going to go in this business? Because this guy is a very heavyweight stakeholder in this organization, and he just basically demolished my intent and my ambition to combine the what with the how. I think that's what I've always been about. I've always wanted to solve business problems and at the same time look at how does it actually happen? How do people do that? And so the reason why I bring up this imaginary CEO, who obviously is a real person, but I think a lot of people probably can see themselves in Michael, is that's what he learned. He learned it, as you said earlier, he learned it in school, he learned it in university, and then, climbing up the corporate ladder. And it's based on a worldview that, you call it reductionist, for instance. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we experience when love and power are separated go back to, a few guys. Aristotle comes to mind, the dualist, the 10 dualist commandments. I don't know exactly how they're called. The whole thing about right or wrong, male and female, logic and emotion and stuff like that. We have René Descartes, who basically came up with the notion of the man as a machine. I mean, a lot of our organizations are conceived in the image of a machine. You just have to look at the language that we use when we talk about, fixing an organization. These are some of the foundational philosophies that our organizations are built on. Now, you are coming with love and power united in service of purpose. And the way to get there, to just top it, is hope. Because Michael now would say, Marcus, hope is not a business strategy. So how do we get Michael from A to B?
The first question is, does he want to go from A to B? You told me that this is 20 years ago. So let's say we're 20 years later now. He is tired, very burnt out, and he probably can see that the systems that have been serving him really well are the same systems that are killing our planet. So if he doesn't see that, I probably wouldn't even have the ambition to talk to him, because you cannot convince people.
Agreed. So let's amalgamate a few other connotations and developments into Michael. Michael has a 15-year-old daughter who is very conscious of the environment and is starting to ask ever more painful questions over dinner when he is there, because he works 60, 70 hours. And also he already had a burnout. Yeah, he does realize he intellectually has started to grasp that the optimization for efficiency has probably reached the end of the line, and that a few other things have just reached kind of like breaking point. He still struggles massively with notions of showing vulnerability at work in front of his coworkers or even his boss or subordinates, as he would call them. So he gets it, but he doesn't embody it yet, and he's pretty scared.
That's the word that I wanted to bring in, and that's fear. That's when I start feeling empathy. And I think that fear is something that will possibly also be very helpful. Depends what the fear, this greatest fear. Generally, the first big fear is the fear of loss of control. Also, Michael, no matter which board he is on, he has to report to somebody. And there is someone who expects him to be in control. And if he ever shows himself as vulnerable and is not sure, that is going to be translated into loss of control and not doing a good job. So that's the fear. I think it is trying to connect him to others who are in the same or in a similar place, and maybe already just a tiny little bit further. It's there. It's not going away. Understanding that power is something else than just being in control and having power over someone or something else. It is the beginning to understand, hey, wait a minute. It's not about me being more powerful than others to control them, to be the one in charge, to be the one responsible, which is just really hard. But that power is something that we can utilize for the greater good. We hear a lot of shifting from power over to power with, but power with still holds the relational dependency. So yes, we want to step into our full authentic power and invite others to do the same, because boy, when we are powerful together, we can rock the world, right? And then it's about going even beyond that, which means power is a fluid phenomenon that is there when we need it and not when we don't. So it is a natural force, if you want to. Maybe one day we can even stop talking about it because it is there for us, like love. It is there. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So that is power as and love as.
And so let's just add a few ingredients to this amalgamated chief executive. He does like his artifacts of power. He does like his driver, his company car, his corner office. He is a bit afraid that with this whole notion of self-organization, everything is a bit more on a level playing field, that if you take that away from him, I mean, just to put it simply, driving home, he feels very different about himself. He feels probably a bit more sort of like short-sleeved, kurzärmlich, because he just prides himself of being an executive and making a lot of money and boasting those artifacts. And he's not even one of these super arrogant and show-offy types. It's just, this is him. This is part of his identity. That's something that he's worried about to let go of. And then he's also quite a strong critic. He has his inner critic. He's called Michael Sven. Sven is the voice of his inner critic. And then he also has the shamer, the guy, that actually knows that it's not really that good what he's doing and what maybe his company is doing, and that his 15-year-old daughter is really mirroring the right things. And so he comes home and he just drinks 2 glasses of wine. He's not an alcoholic, but the 2 glasses of wine very, very quickly get him over that feeling inside. And he just washes over that, slightly numbs the pain. And then after dinner, he checks in with his wife, and then he has to do 3 hours of more emails. So he is at that threshold. So given that he wants and he knows that he should, what would be some very practical tips, some practices, some recommendations that you would have for such person to now actually move with more confidence, with more mindfulness into their emerging reality?
Get someone who can hold space for you to actually find out what it is that doesn't feel right.
How did you overcome that threshold, or how did you cross that threshold? How did you change your story? How did you leave the stories behind that no longer served you? Because the stories of the past, they carry a lot of trauma. They carry also a lot of joy, but they also, the bad ones, carry a lot of trauma. Given that you are where you are in the way, I guess, you live, love, and work and parent, when we say it has to start with yourself, yeah, of course it does. But where did you actually start? And what were some of the processes or practices or courses or programs or people you talked to that actually in hindsight created these pivotal moments where you realized that's when something really, really manifested? And that's when from one moment to the next, I embodied an actualized self. And the reason why I zoom into that moment to moment is because that's really how it actually works on a neurological level. There is only that from moment to moment. Everything else is a story. It's a projection into the future, and it's a review of the past. So I would love to hear a little bit more about very, very personal journey.
I do have a few people who were really crucially important for my journey. The first one was Monica Müller from the Art of Hosting, who helped me find out that I was actually talking about love. I was in the business world and in a conversation, in a training where I was with the Art of Hosting community, she said, it just really seems like what you are actually asking is, how does love manifest in the corporate world? And I was like, I can't talk about love. And she said, why not? And it just went, it was just a gift. So that was really crucially important. So for a long time, I felt my personal purpose was the manifestation of love in the way we do our work in the world, both individually and collectively. So that is how I felt my purpose was for a very long time, until I went into deeper search. And then another woman who actually really helped me understand myself better and also approach things differently was Arowana Hayashi from the Presencing Institute. She does the social presencing theater. And over the years, I've done many courses with her. And through her, I actually really understood mindfulness and presence. In the end, I did her SPT advanced training, which is really super, super, super helpful and really helped me, gave me a lot of strength in the sense of knowing when to go into my body and to be there, just really, really be here in the moment. And also trusting that intuitive process, trusting your own intuition and learning that through expressing it with your body. So that was really important. And then, of course, high appreciation for my colleague, Tom Thomason, who actually did a webinar where he said the spaces that show up when practicing holacracy, which was the seed for me to look into and then develop the language of spaces.
That brings us back to your book, because our organizations are not designed for authenticity. They almost are designed to not have emotions at all. It's just trying to design it all out. And yet, as you said earlier, you've got the organization, and then you've got the people, and then you've got the finances and the legal side. And that's what Encode is about. And with the people, it's just there. It's like, thermodynamics, the energy that's in the universe is there. You can't do away with it. You can just shift it. But the last thing you can do is, which is why I struggled for almost 20 years with this concept of leave the emotions out. It just doesn't work. And so what would you tell Michael? Why is it worth to show more authenticity, more vulnerability, and put that in service for the development of yourself? And once you develop yourself towards that aim, you may actually catalyze some positive change in other people around you as well.
In the end, it's going to be up to Michael to decide whether he feels that he can change something for not just for himself, but for others as well in the organization. So if the intention really is to actually support the system to shift, I think he can always do it. But of course, if there's somebody with more power who does not shift power and will hinder it, then I think it's probably very soon it would be the time for Michael to leave. And again, he's not alone. There are plenty of organizations out there who would probably love to invite him in and say, hey, we need you.
And you mentioned earlier that it's always conducive to look up to some role models that are not completely sort of like, way off the charts where you are, but people that are probably a bit more adjacent. So for Michael, who are some of the executives in the privately held companies in Europe that you would say, yeah, they're not perfect, but they have done some demonstrable steps in the right directions? Yeah, they do a few things really well around self-organizing and also allowing that safe space for showing emotions at work and being vulnerable and being authentic. Are there any companies that come to mind that you would give a shout out?
So there's a German company called Hyperport, which are doing a really great job. It's a financial services company. Doug Kirkpatrick, he was with Morningstar when they started to shift. He always says, so 2 simple rules, give simple rules for complex issues, not complex rules, which makes people act simple, right? So he uses this, which is really great. I really like that. But then when he answers questions, of course, they have a lot of defined processes and they're very clear on what's possible and what's not possible. So I'm really intrigued. That's, of course, an American company that has been doing that for many, many years. I think over 20. I think they started in 1990, so 30 years now. And then, of course, there's Zappos, the big American example, who has moved, they started with Holacracy and they moved on using more for the people stuff and culture stuff and so on. Netherlands is big on that.
Buurtzorg?
Buurtzorg, yes. Buurtzorg has a fantastic and a really great solution. I think it's awesome what they did. And it is not scalable into other sectors. So that's for home care because it is so specifically designed. It was developed for that business. And therefore it solves the issues that business has. So I don't know enough about the details about the Morningstar solution, but actually Sociocracy and Holacracy are the only 2 systems that were actually developed in order to be scalable over any organization. All the other systems were developed for a specific organization. And then it's really hard to scale it.
It brings us back to the wonderful definition of power that you gave earlier, which then led us to quickly have a look at the guiding principles of the universe. So the universe has some laws, some fundamental entities, some properties. It has gravity, it has the weak force, the strong force, and other properties. So there clearly seems to be some frame that's been given, some rules that's been given to it. And within that, there is self-organization. What would you say are the one or the two most important rules or frames, in the sense of like a container, a containment in which holacracy and sociocracy can flourish?
Let's talk about the power shift, okay? Because that is holacracy and more. There are 5 self-organizing practice norms. If you follow these norms, you then can pretty much rely on the fact that you will get a scalable self-organizing system. The first one is purpose. You need purpose orientation. Otherwise, you need a boss. So purpose is the new boss. And if you have a system that is fully oriented towards purpose, you have the chance to actually have a sustainable, self-organized system. The second one is structure. One of the biggest misconceptions of self-organization is that it is a flat organization. So nature isn't flat, right? Nature has structure, clear structure. And structure also means boundaries. So you need purpose orientation and you need structure, and self-organization means an organic structure, a holarchy. And again, I have to say that just by using the word holarchy doesn't mean you have to use holacracy. Still, I'm saying there is still no better system yet defined, but nonetheless, the structure is a holarchy and not a holacracy, which is what often gets mispronounced, right? The third one is awareness, the capacity to sense into the moment and from there to feel what is needed next. That's going away from predict and control into sense and respond. The fourth one is what we call agency. That means you as an individual, you hold agency, you are intrinsically motivated, and you feel that intrinsic motivation towards serving and being self-responsible for it. So holding I am an agent for what I do. And the fifth and last one, but there is no hierarchy in those definitions, is transparency. So as much transparency as you can possibly stomach in any way. There is an organization, I think it's called August. If you go and you can find their entire financial stuff on the web. They're just bringing everything out, right? I don't know whether that is right for every organization. It's right for them. But at least internally, for everybody who is part of this enterprise, you need complete transparency about everything. So it's purpose, structure, awareness, agency, and transparency as the 5 practice norms of self-organization. Yeah, that will shift power, you bet.
That would shift power, and that sounds doable for Michael. I think he would probably grab structure first, naturally. I think we could entice him into some transparency experiments, because he hates that he can't see what his peers are doing, because, it's all in the silo, and everyone comes together for these senseless presentations for quarterly results, and how the numbers actually add up is basically, as one of my friends and collaborators, Christiane, calls it, business theater. It's just everyone knows the numbers in some shape or form are fudged. And so he probably does really, really want to probably make a name for himself for breaking that, making things more transparent, because he's a numbers guy. And he thinks that a lot of his people could actually make some good use of the numbers and maybe relieve him from some responsibilities and get home an hour or 2 hours earlier each day by just putting it all out to people and letting them figure out what to do with the numbers rather than being the most paid employee to make slides, which is what the Michaels of this world quite often will do on a quarterly basis, very much to their dismay. And so I'd like to start to round things up a little bit here. What are you claiming in yourself, Christiane, right now in the space that you are occupying? Where are you at? Okay, so you're co-founder of Encode, you're going to write the book. And what is your radical ownership moving forwards? How are you going to unfold your power and your love? What's emerging for you right now?
I have always had a hard time asking for help. Always. It's been my issue, my shadow, big time. And due to my current situation and through the encouragement of one of my dearest friends, I have started a crowdfunding campaign. And I am asking, I have a network all over the world. I am asking the entire world. It feels like that for me. I am asking the entire world for help. And I can tell you that's a big journey for me. I'm already so gifted with so much gratitude. I said the other day, for me, gratitude now is defined as a legal drug because you get high on it. It's just amazing.
It sounds like it. And one of the things that I deeply admire in you is that you seem to design your life as a massive experiment with lots of small experiments to test and try. I love the crowdfunding campaign. The book will be a pay as you can afford price tag so that you can reach as many people as possible. And you also have a website called Christiane's Place. And one of the things that struck me when I went there for the first time is that you have, in a very elegant way, commercialized the dialogue that you have with people. Because coming back to what I said earlier, there are Holacracy practitioners, and then there are people like Tom Thomason and Christiane Zoes-Schöller who have basically conceived and designed it and brought it to Europe and everywhere else in the world. And so I'd like to just finish off a little bit with how you reinvent yourself as a practitioner, because what I hear from most of my colleagues, and certainly what I experienced myself, is that since the lockdown, the world has moved to remote working and also remote workshops. And most, at least the clients I talk to, they really, really say this whole dance between the clients and the consultants, where we have these like 2-3 day workshops, like fancy design thinking type workshops where everyone feels really good. They said that I don't think we're going to go back to that because it's actually really expensive. And to your point earlier, when these people then go back, they're going to hit the autopilot of that system. They're going to hit the DNA wants to sort of like chuck out the people that have come back maybe from some fancy training program. And so it sounds very much like what I find myself doing these days, which is just having conversations with people. But you have, in a very elegant and very innovative way, constructed, I guess, just sort of like an open invite, really. So people can find you in Christiane's Place and have a dialogue with you and ask you questions. What's that all about? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, thank you for asking for that. So many people started reaching out to me, and I love sharing. And I realized that actually, because of the quite some years of experience right now and the many different experiences, people ask me, I say what I have to say, and I get the feedback that it's interesting, it's useful, it's helpful. And so, of course, with everything that I do, I only have limited time and I have to make a living. So being a pioneer like me is not you don't get rich through being a pioneer. So I have a son that I'm still supporting. I have my life that I need to support. And I was in the dilemma that I wanted to make that time available in different formats, but that I just couldn't afford to do that because it's just, But then I also thought, why I don't only want to make my time and my knowledge available through like having a big consulting contract that'll take me, I don't know, through everything. So if you want to have just, have an hour and a half, you just book it and ask me anything. I will tell you whatever I know, my entire experience, everything I have developed, I have experienced. I say no, I say yes. I would just ask me. So I will happily share. And just Christiane's place, go and book the time or just send me an email. LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm everywhere. So that's really what I want to do. I'm happy to share. I just, like everybody else, have to make a living.
And it reminds me of Linux, the open source software. It's a little bit actually linked to when love and power is united in service of purpose. This is the purest form right now that Christiane can be, what you can offer to the world. And, with ever more intensity, you can share your wisdom with all of us on how to self-actualize first, because it always starts with yourself. And then, coming back to Michael, our amalgamated CEO, once you've done your baby steps and you've got some proof and you can embody that proof, that's really, really important, that you actually look in the mirror in the morning and you trust the story that you're telling yourself. And the story is shifting and is starting to sort of like be less blame, be less shame, and just have more connotations of claim ownership, be radically honest with yourself and with your surroundings. That's really where we're headed as a system. And I'm really pleased. And yeah, as I said before, really, I'm actually quite grateful that you do what you do and that you design your life in the way you do as a pioneer, so that we can learn from you and from your experiences. And so I'd like to do a checkout, Christiane. How was this conversation for you and how do you feel right now?
I am, again, high on gratefulness because of the way you conducted this conversation, Marcus. The level of appreciation from you is overwhelming in the best possible sense. And I'm really touched and I'm really thankful. So thank you for this conversation and for you being you and the way you do this.
Thank you so much. And I guess I like to check out with, there's the saying in agility and all sorts of other new work methods, trust the process. And that's something that I certainly learned in the last years a lot more, because the universe has our back. It is what it is. There is only our universe. There might be other ones, but we're not in it. And we know how this universe operates, and that there are these rules and that you can trust them, and that everything within is self-organizing and it does work. And if we just let go of that strong sense of control, which I still notice in myself, even though I've let go of a lot of it, it almost becomes easy, actually. It's not that difficult to have a joyful life if you just stick to a few rules. So on that note, thank you so much for giving us your time, your energy, your love, your wisdom. And I wish you a wonderful evening over in Vienna.
Thank you too. Have a beautiful evening. I'm taking this wonderful energy with me. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. With effect of this episode, I'm adding a little outro section with a specific call to action at the end. Why am I doing this? As I often say, change starts with you and in the here and now. So let's do something now, and the more of you listeners take action as a result of this episode, the less we go back to normal. So, when we talked about the semi-fictitious persona Michael and his fears, Christiane mentioned that if you find yourself in a similar place, that something doesn't feel quite right at a deeper level, and you really want to make a change in your life, but you perhaps feel too daunted by it. Start with asking someone to hold a safe space for you. And by that I mean a regular conversation either in person or over the phone, where you can think out loud, get stuff off your chest, and most importantly, be heard by another human being. This person doesn't need to be a professional like a coach or a therapist. The key capacity here is they need to embody active listening, and they need to know when to merely hold up a mirror to you, ask more questions, or to give you advice. Thanks again for listening, guys. I do have one ask. If you do like this podcast, please leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, which currently is the only platform where I can receive direct feedback from you. It means a lot to me.